Okay, we've returned from closed session, and we have nothing to report. Ms. Drivdahl.
All right, continuing on with the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority agenda. Number 6, consent agenda. The following consent agenda items are expected to be routine. They will be acted upon by the board at one time. Any board member, staff member, or interested person may request that any consent item be removed for discussion. A, approval of the March 14th, 2019 TCEDA Governing Board's regular meeting minutes. B, approval of the March 14th, 2019 TCEDA Governing Board special meeting minutes.
Any discussion from the board? Any public comment on the consent agenda? Looking for a motion?
Move on the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Rotifer, second by Yaraventi. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Passes 5-0. Next item.
Number 7. Business. A, consideration of approving the distribution plan for TCEDA physical inventory and directing staff to implement same.
So at the last TCEDA board meeting, you directed staff to take several actions to begin disposal of the TCEDA property. And we have received the request from the city and the county that is attached to your agenda packet. So the city's request is highlighted in yellow. The SBDC Workplace Sonora's request is highlighted in pink. They were one of the entities that had loaned property from the TCEDA. The blue highlight denotes the robot that's on loan to the superintendent of schools office, and the county wishes to maintain the rest of the property. It intends to use the current office space and does not wish to purchase new equipment in order to create functioning office spaces. Additionally, there are a few items that are highlighted in orange, and those are pieces of property that both the city and the county requested. So given that the property is to be distributed according to the funding formula, which is approximately 76% county and 24% city, our recommendation is that the county receive all of the property it requested. So that would include the orange highlights, and then the city gets the yellow only. SBDC would purchase for fair market value 3 pieces of property. And then in discussions with the superintendent of schools office, they may not have funding to actually purchase the robot at fair market value. However, they are interested. I haven't heard back from them in terms of what a reasonable price would be, but they have a lending library where all the schools in the county can actually borrow this piece of equipment. So in terms of getting the most use out of it for all of the schools, it seems like the best idea would be to direct us to negotiate some sort of reasonable price with the superintendent of schools office so that they could purchase it and then allow all of the schools to use this equipment. So our recommendation is on page 2 of the memo. And the other thing that, if your board is inclined, we would ask is that for the pieces of property that the SBDC is interested in purchasing, that would be the 2010 era Dell monitor and desktop and a 19-inch Dell monitor, and then also the robot separately, that your board would designate those as surplus property not needed for TCEDA, city, or county use, as none of those entities had requested these pieces of property, and that it would be beneficial to the public to dispose of this property.
So no one from the city or county has requested those particular items?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's our presentation. So if you would like to make changes to that, please let us know.
Any board comment?
Yeah. So you mentioned that the yellow stuff is what the city had indicated, and that the remainder, I assume that anything is unmarked is what that the county wanted?
Correct.
Okay. And so there's been and because of the 76 to 24 split, so there's been a valuation or a monitor to figure out that
We need to do that still, so that's something that I'm sorry I did not address. We still need to work with the auditor. So our recommendation would be for any property that's 2016 or newer, to place a fair market value on it, and anything that's older than that to place a surplus value. Part of our recommendation is trying to expedite this process, as we have heard from both entities, that you would like the dissolution of the entity to proceed quickly. In order to do that, we're trying to make it simple for the staff here that has to work on this process. So certainly, once there is value assigned, it will be much more clear to see the funding formula and how that breaks down. If there are issues, we can certainly bring that back to your board, but to the extent that we can kind of, again, expedite this process, it would be helpful for staff.
Okay. You know, with all the orange stuff that's in dispute, I suppose, the only thing that, from the city standpoint, that we would have a debate over, or question over, need for, really, is desks. So I'm wondering if we can't reevaluate.
So one option then is we can go ahead and place a value on the desks, and once we value all the property, and then come back to your board and have your board make a determination, and we'll be able to see the breakdown for the
Yeah.
property distribution.
We want to, obviously, we want to be fair. I believe we did identify from the county that we wanted to keep some of those desks in there because we plan on moving offices over there. And that was the purpose of those. But let's,
Can I say something?
Sure.
Maybe give you an alternative?
share.
Is that child support, who is a JPA, just gave the county 19 desks, very nice desks, that are sitting over at TGH. Perhaps if there's somebody from the city who wants to go look at those 19 desks, and those desks would work for the city, then we could do a swap.
Okay.
It's just an alternative if they want to look at those desks. You know, they're going to have, the city would have to move, and they can move them from TGH to the city without too much of
Yeah,
a problem, and it's from the JPA, from child support.
Yeah. The only thing that was, came up was, when looking at this, was about desks. So if we can figure out a way to work with that, and we'd like to do that.
Right, because it looks like there were 3 desks that the city indicated it wanted, so.
Yeah, and the other stuff, you know, was not an issue, so.
Okay. Okay, well, then we can work with the city, and do you want them to work directly with you, Debbie, on that?
Yes.
Okay.
If they want to come look at TGH, they're more than welcome to come look.
Okay.
Matt, you okay? Any other board comment? Any public comment? This is on the distribution. Okay.
Is the TCEDA laptop or the 3, and I don't know what they were, Microsoft tablets or anything, is that included in your list?
I'm going to have to refer to staff.
Yes.
Okay. In our last conversation, you said that the files would be removed. Has that occurred?
That is actually another item that we are going to be discussing about shortly.
Okay, so you
But-
can't
but-
confirm for me
But certainly we
in what
have-
condition they're in?
I have not opened them up, but it's my understanding that anything that was on them has been removed to a hard drive, which my office maintains.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question about the drone. Does anyone know what happened to that?
The city requested the drone.
The city did?
Yes, it's on the list, and all the
Okay.
materials are at the back of the room.
I
The
saw that, but
inventory
I
is
didn't see
attached.
the drone on it.
Okay, the
Okay.
inventory is attached, and it is
Thank
on
you.
that list.
Okay, thank you.
It's right at the very bottom of the first page.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Okay, any other public comment? All right, board's pleasure.
Well, so I need to kind of understand where we think we're going. Are we approving this disposition with direction to staff to negotiate with the city on the orange items? What's your,
Well, it seems like we can work with the city on the desk, 3 desks that they apparently need, that we can work
okay.
with them on that.
Okay, so we'll pull those 3 out to be worked with the city
Well,
and,
I don't think we should do that. I think that what Debbie's suggesting is that there are 19 other desks available that they can go look at.
Okay.
And choose 3 of those, so that because the issue is, the county wants to keep what's in that office.
at the office, so we
without
don't have to
moving it
move
out.
stuff around.
Right.
Okay, well then my motion is on staff recommendation to approve this disposition with direction to staff to work with the city on satisfying their need for desks. Is that a good one? Okay.
That works for.
Does that work? It's a motion. Looking for a second?
Before I second, I just want to, you've seen the desks, I haven't. They're in pretty good shape? Okay, all right. I'll take your word for it. Second.
Okay, that's motion by Rutherford, second by Garaventi. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Will you please read the next item?
Presentation and acceptance of management and financial audits, presented by Auditor Controller Debbie Batista.
I'm not quite sure what your pleasure is. Do we want to kind of go through each audit way up here and not go through every single line or every single number, but kind of go through it so
I
that
think
we
the high
cover
level,
it?
the high level, we all have copies of it. It's been presented to the public. If there's public questions, you can probably answer those, so.
All right, so why don't we go through the financial audit, which is the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority, Independent Auditor's Report, Management Discussion, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So some of the things that I want to highlight in this audit is that these are the financial statements not only of the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority, but also the Economic Prosperity Council. The Economic Prosperity Council is a component unit because the same board is on both of them. So where in the past, what was presented to this board as internal financial statements only included TCEDA, these include both entities. The other difference with these audits is that because they are audited financial statements and not internal financial statements, all of the components of generally accepted accounting principles and government and accounting standard practices have to be applied. So in these financial statements, you'll also see the unfunded liability from PERS. And that's when the numbers change materially. So if one looks at them, I'm kind of on page 8. If one looks at them, the very first column, the governmental fund balance sheet, is the Economic Prosperity Council and TCEDA, but then the notes, the adjustments include the PERS adjustments, and for government entities, which most people don't understand, is government entities do not have fixed assets on their balance sheets. If you all who pass budgets, if you'll remember that part of your budgets have equipment in your budget, where most private entities will put equipment on their balance sheets. So the adjustment also shows any equipment activities that they have. Then on page 9 is giving the revenue and expenditures. And if you look at, from the governmental side, you know, like the financial statements that Mr. Cope would present to you guys, is that the net revenues and the net expenses was positive. That's the $24,000. When you apply PERS to that, it becomes negative. Page 10 is going to show and tell you about the budget and whether or not we were in compliance with the budget, or TCEDA was in compliance, and the economic prosperity, it was. There was no variances up except in revenues, and that's always a good thing to have a positive expense. A positive well, it's not, it's negative in revenues, but you don't want to have a negative in expenditures. Then you have the notes, and again, none of this is different than what we've said before. The Economic Development Authority is a board of 7 people. It's a JPA, we're the city and the county. The blended component unit is the Economic Prosperity Council. They use generally accepted accounting principles. They use accrual basis. The cash is with the treasurer. There was almost $52,000 from the Economic Prosperity Council out with an outside bank, because remember, the Economic Prosperity Council activity was not in the county's pooled cash. It was kept separately. There was a due from other governments at the end of the year from the city of Sonora. The city of Sonora always pays 1 month late, or 1 month after the fact, so June was a receivable. Compensating balances, because there's employees in the entity that at the end of the fiscal year, then we calculate if the employees walked out the door that day, how much that would be. There is a little difference. I just want to be really clear about this. There's difference between the internal financial statements that was prepared and these for the compensating balances, because I believe everybody is aware, Mr. Cope reduced his accruals by 80 hours based upon his timekeeping, and that was the agreement that he agreed to with us. The pension, they talk about PERS. TCEDA does not contract directly with PERS, but they are a member of the county's PERS. So it's giving you all of the different components of PERS. Also remember that Mr. Cope is not the only employee that is a vested, which means they have more than 5 years, member of PERS from TCEDA. The other 2 office managers, I think were their titles, are also vested PERS members, and part of the liabilities for them too. The whole liability is not just Mr. Cope, which I've kind of heard from a couple people, and I just want to clarify that. There's 3 employees, not just 1. They talk about the capital assets. Most of the capital assets were purely depreciated over the 10 years, except for, if you'll remember, the robot that we're discussing with the schools was burnt when Somerville had their fire, and so there was an insurance refund, and this new robot was actually paid by insurance money, not TCED's money, and that was purchased last year. The pension is there. I don't know how much you really want me to go through the pension and try to explain it.
I think for the benefit of the public, a little bit of explanation. Every government agency with employees has unfunded liability, and maybe you could just talk to that.
Sure. Almost every single jurisdiction in the state of California that is a PERS member has unfunded liability. The total PERS unfunded liabilities, if you put all the jurisdictions together, is they're funded about 70%. The county of Tuolumne in the 17 actuarial is funded about 68%. The way that the PERS is calculated, it's a pretty simple formula. It's based upon the number of years an employee has, who has at least 5 years in there, their age, and a formula depending on which of the 3 tiers. The County of Tuolumne has 3 different tiers that you are in. Because salaries are going up, and employees are working longer, believe it or not, and living a whole lot longer. And over the last 3 years, PERS has made, for all entities, not just the County of Tuolumne, they have made some decisions to affect how one calculates the unfunded liability. There is a discount rate, which means how much money PERS thinks they're going to earn every year. And a couple years ago, that discount rate was 7.5. They have decided, PERS has decided that they're going to bring that discount rate down to 7% over the last couple years. So last year they brought it down, the year before they brought it down, and this will be the last year, meaning 18, that they're going to bring it down. If you look at, to give you an example, if you look at page 22, they're showing that the current discount rate at 7.15, the unfunded liability is almost $618,000. You drop it by only 1%, and it goes up to $856,000, because the discount rate is applied for the life of PERS and how much they believe are going to be earned each year. So if in the beginning, one believed that you're going to earn 7 to 8% or 7.5% to 8% every year, and now you say you're going to learn 7%, it's not just applied for the future. You have to go back in time and figure out all of those balances, and did you make that? So just moving the discount rate by 1% increases the unfunded liability by almost $140,000. And that, in essence, PERS changed the discount rate by more than 0.5% over the last couple of years. Then if they don't earn what they think they're going to earn, the last couple of years they have earned greater than 7%. But if you'll remember a couple of years ago, not only did they not earn 7%, they had a negative earnings of 1.2, I think. And when you're talking about millions and billions of dollars, that can shift your unfunded liability materially. So every single year, PERS does a calculation for every jurisdiction and calculates based upon the current payroll, who's vested, who's not vested, and then the age of the employees, when they think people are going to retire. They have all the formulas that an actuarial has, and they come up with the unfunded or what should be in your account to make sure that those employees are covered when they do indeed retire. And so for most jurisdictions, that amount's negative.
So when thinking back on a couple of the seminars I was at on PERS, that no matter who we hire in government, we end up hiring an unfunded liability.
Absolutely. And sometimes when employees leave us and go someplace else, their unfunded liability for us actually increases, because PERS has reciprocity with almost every single jurisdiction, including 1937 Act, City and County of San Francisco, who has their own PERS, Los Angeles County, who has their own PERS. So since he's no longer with us, I could use him. Mr. White used to be the HSA director and worked for Orange County. When he worked for Orange County, and he worked for them, and they're a 1937 Act county, his salary was materially low, like $10,000 or $20,000 a year. When he retired from the County of Tuolumne, his salary is in excess of $100,000. So when applied for Orange County, even though he only had a couple of years, they did not use his $10,000 to $20,000 salary. They used his 100+ that salary. So when we have employees who go to other jurisdictions and their salaries increase, their years with Tuolumne County does not change. Their age changes, but the salary that PERS uses to do their final compensation is their best 12 months, which is probably not here. And nowhere is that in our calculation, because they don't know Johnny or Billy or Mary is working for this other entity until Johnny or Billy or Mary retires.
And I think one other thing I do recall is that this liability becomes a real problem if everybody decides to retire on the same day.
I haven't told this our board yet, but in fiscal year what year are we in? In fiscal year 18-19, I already have 25 county employees who have retired.
Yeah.
That is probably double the number I've ever seen.
Yep.
And those are the ones that I know who have retired because they still work for us. That doesn't count the people who have gone someplace else.
Yeah. It's an issue that we always think about and try to resolve by adding additional monies to that unfunded liability.
Right, and that's the best, is to start making additional payments. And that's what, when we come up with a decision on how to deal with this unfunded liability, the county will take those funds and pay down our unfunded liability with that, and that will help us.
Okay.
That's probably it for the fiscal audit. If we want to now look at the management audit, which is totally different, it's not numbers. It's the one that says Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority evaluation of selected control elements of the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority, and it's dated April 11th. So what we asked of the management group was some of the items from the grand jury. And again, there are no findings in here that we didn't know that were going to come. There was no surprises in this audit. So what they did was they looked at the travel and training policies. They looked at the matrix between TCEDA and some comparison entities. They looked at the IRS guidelines and whether or not that was being followed. They looked at segregations of duties, and their findings aren't surprising. Their findings were that their internal controls over travel and training was lacking, and that there should be more segregation of duties, that there should be some better policies to follow the IRS, that any travel and training should at least identify the entity, if not the entity, the type of entity, which is kind of where I think where we're going to go for the county, that there should be better backup of what the travel and training expenses were, that the matrix used by TCEDA were fewer than the other ones from the other entities that they looked at, that some of, again, the personnel leave accruals and cash outs were not followed, and that there was some issues, and again, Mr. Cope paid back the 80 hours, that there were some issues between, of inconsistencies between his Outlook calendar and his time cards. You know, on a personal note, we learned a lot from TCEDA. JPAs are their own, and I'm only speaking for me, Sarah can speak for herself. JPAs are their own jurisdictions, and I truly thought by having the JPA adopt their own policies and procedures, that was enough. But in hindsight, we should have still applied and make sure that the board understood that the policies and procedures, because I don't, you know, no offense to any of you, but the policies and procedures that were adopted way back when basically were not policies and procedures because the director could overrule anything.
And that
In
was,
the future, we will never, ever, ever do that again.
I think that the lessons learned are good, and the things that, we've totally agreed to make those.
Sure.
Those changes, so it doesn't happen, crystal balls and hindsight's wonderful, if we'd had one. But, you sit on these boards and you make the assumptions that the policies that you're working under are the ones that are being followed to the best ability. And we had, in a sense, two sets of policies, and that didn't help us. Kate, you want to go on?
Sure. So now we can look at the letter from the communications and material weaknesses, and I'm going to say almost the same things I just said that was in the management audit, that the travel and business expense policies were not very strong, and that they believe. One of the things I think everybody needs to remember is that these management comments and this management findings are on TCEDA, not the county, not the city. And my answers to them were kind of what the new entity will be under the county, because TCEDA, in essence, doesn't exist anymore. So what they were recommending was that the policy should be clear, they should be reviewed and approved for the new director, and that there should be some kind of better documentation. My answer was, I agree, which all of you guys said the same thing to the grand jury, and that since this will be a county employee, the new policies will be written and reviewed and approved, even related to entertaining potential clients, not just for this entity, but other county employees too that do, there's not too many, but that do entertain potential clients. Again, the time card approval was that Mr. Cope approved his own time cards and that there should be some segregation of duties and somebody else should do it. Again, I agreed. The new director will be reporting to the county administrator as a county employee, so the approval will be there. The use of comp time and vacation time, they're recommending, that we use the county policies. Again, we agreed with that. We also agreed that, that the new employee will be very clear about what their workday is, their work week, and that there will be some training for that new employee if they do not understand for the Fair Labor Standards Act, better known as FLSA. They're recommending that we close down the Economic Prosperity Council so that both entities, again, the beginning of this was written as if TCEDA was going forward, that the entity was all in the county, pooled cash, and everything was together. And again, I said that I agree, and that we are in the process of closing down the council. Again, none of these are any different, and there's no surprises here. They just are affirming things that we already knew.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about one thing. I understand why you responded the way you do, and I don't disagree with any of your responses in terms of agree or disagree. However, the county has not determined yet that entity will be a county employee or what the nature of it will be. So I don't think that that's, to make that assumption is inaccurate at this point.
Jim, did you have something?
Yeah, page 3, Economic Prosperity Council. Recommendation, authority should close the council's separate bank account, transfer the balance to the county's investment pool. If there's is this a balance to finish up the EDA or the EPC, or is this if there's a balance, a surplus at the end? what's the recommendation there? Because it seems to me if there's a surplus at the end, it would be under the 70-24 split. Or is this to continue on to expenses?
Yeah, we'll be talking about the dissolution of the EPC later on
Okay.
this afternoon.
And just to be clear, because I gave a number at, as of June 30th, currently, the balance in the Economic Prosperity Council is $19,642.04, not the 50-some thousand dollars that was there as June 30th.
The intention is that that money will be transferred to the EDA. So it'll-
Oh, okay.
And then distributed according to the funding formula and/or to pay down some of the debts and liabilities that we will address here shortly.
Okay. So if that money is so their recommendation is to transfer it to the investment pool, but actually, our discussions have been to go into the EDA.
Okay,
Is that,
what they're suggesting, and again, they're not suggesting that you necessarily close down the TC, or the Economic Prosperity Council. What they're suggesting is that the Economic Prosperity Council, since it's a component unit of the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority, should all be under the county's pooled cash as its own entity. You would not combine the two until this board decides or doesn't decide that. It would be like all the fire districts, each fire district that has funds in the county pool, they're all independent. They have their own funds. They're just recommending the money should not be outside. It should be in the county pool under the control of the county auditor and the county treasurer, like TCEDA is.
In Debbie's bank.
okay.
Actually, it's Justin's bank. but,
Justin's bank, excuse me.
Debbie allocates it, but it's Justin's bank.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Did you finish, Debbie?
The only other one has to do with the pension, and we kind of went through that. So I'm done unless somebody else, unless there's questions.
Okay. Ron? Just a question.
Just a question on the financial audit, and I thank you for the explanation on the pension plan. I can't say I understand it 100%, but a little bit better. Based on your experience, does anything stand out in those numbers? Anything on the financial audit that stood out and said, hey, this is not quite right?
From a financial standpoint, TCEDA really has not had troubles in the whole 10 years. If you were on the board at the very beginning of time and the very end, the internal financial statements showed you a slow growth in TCEDA. Some years, some of the money was used. There was years where there was more grants than prior years. There's nothing, excluding the pension, there's nothing in the financial statements that's really extraordinary. The majority of the funding is from the city and the county. In 2018, there wasn't hardly any grant money. The largest expenditures were in salaries and benefits, travel and training. But that's been but the entity that we're talking about, that's where their largest expenditures would be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
When were these given to the media?
Same day I gave it to everybody,
Okay.
Monday.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess my big thing is that usually I'll get emails or phone calls, and I haven't received any phone calls, and even though I don't disagree with what we've heard today, I can't vote to accept this right now until the public does more looking into it.
Okay, so we're not at that point right now, but we certainly will take it under consideration.
Yeah, I just don't think it's fair, and we've had our the grand jury looking through everything, and I think transparency is ultimate in this, and I don't think it's necessarily transparent.
So what part of it do you not believe is transparent? Is there a specific area?
25 hours of notice.
No, I'm talking about the document.
No,
Matt.
no, I don't, again, I have not fully read through these.
Okay, all right,
like
okay.
most of
I understand. I just wanted to know if there was something specific in there.
Yeah.
That you found fault with, because then we can address that. Any other board comment?
No, I'm going to wait till after public comment.
Okay. Public comment?
Good afternoon. I'm not a public speaker, but my name is John Garcia, by the way. And thank you for the transparency comments. I really do appreciate that. I don't want to get real personal here because I don't know how many of you folks were on the board when it was first established. I kind of heard initially it did some pretty good things. But over the last few years, the results of the grand jury report were pretty appalling, frankly. I mean, this board created the policies, they wrote the contract, and they were supposed to do the oversight. And it seems that those things were poorly done. And amidst all that stuff was the transparency. And I'm very grateful for the grand jury to bring this to light. But it makes me wonder, what else do I not know? I mean, I've been in this room a number of times where you've come out and said, well, we've decided, for example, the Pedro Y or whatever, and we've decided. But you can share your feelings with us.
Sir,
So my point is,
okay, could I
thank
just?
you
Okay.
for dealing with this, and I appreciate you shutting it down because it seems like it's been a mistake for a couple of years. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's David Goldenberg. A lot of material here, as Mr. Hawkins pointed out, not much time to have a look at this, absorb it, so I've been just taking my notes as I'm listening to this board. I guess my main question that I have is regarding the pension liabilities. So of that $617,000, how much was attributed to Mr. Cope?
Debbie, can you answer that? I don't think it's broken down that far, but
You can't do it that way because it's based upon, because it's part of the county plan. It's how the pension allocation is done, that the auditors review, that the state has approved, and et cetera, is based upon salary dollars, not individuals. So all of the county departments, the courts, TCTC, are scheduled out by their total dollars, not by Johnny and Mary and Susie. And then the pension the pension liability is based upon that. If you wanted to do a projection of what, I don't know what the value would be, but of what Mr. Cope would receive and the other two young ladies would receive, one could make a guess about that, but that doesn't necessarily tie exactly to the liability, because the liability is in the pool, the whole pool itself, and not just those two individuals, though it's based upon salaries. So in essence, TCEDA, who has salaries of X, as compared to all the other departments in the county, plus the courts, plus TCTC, based upon salaries.
Okay, yeah, and I concur, I mean, the lion's share is probably with him because of the salary differentials,
absolutely.
between them. So when he was first hired and the contract was given to him, so in that contract, is that contract available, by the way?
It is available. I don't have it right here.
Yeah,
I can get it for you.
Okay, that would be appreciated. But did the contract specify that he was going to become eligible to go into the CalPERS system?
So
PERS.
what the contract said was that he would get the same benefits as the employees in the counties. I believe at the time it was the management unit. Eventually, it was transferred to the county's executive and confidential compensation unit. But essentially, that meant that he and then the other staff members that were there would be placed into the county's CalPERS program or contract. And that is something that my understanding is both the forming bodies, the city and the county, understood when they created the entity.
So, and I get that, the intention, but he was not hired as a county employee per se, as defined as the other county employees, correct?
Right, he was hired as, under the TCEDA and as an employee of that entity, which is a separate legal entity.
Okay, earlier there was mention that TCEDA did not contract with CalPERS, that this was run through the county system. So I guess my question is, how did these employees that are not county employees get put into CalPERS system? Did CalPERS accept that, or was it just run in through the county? I mean, was it a specific thing that they had to agree? Typically, CalPERS doesn't just allow anybody to come into their system. I can't say, I'd like to be in your system and jump on board, right? So I'm wondering how they ended up there.
The employees of the Tuolumne County Economic Development Authority are reported to CalPERS as County of Tuolumne employees.
But they're not County of Tuolumne employees.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, you know, one of the other, and things change, right? You know, in 2012, they had a big pension reform, and that was enacted January 1st of 2013, and it was kind of, a lot of that was specifically to avoid potential circumstances where people had their salaries escalated artificially and what have you. So that's just where my concerns are, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Barbara Dressler. So just in reference to everyone saying, gee, there's no surprises that came out in this audit, we waited for months for the financial and management audits of TCEDA. The audit gives us undeniable confirmation of what the grand jury findings found, the lawsuit findings found, and the California Public Record Act findings found, which were a $500,000 yearly TCEDA operation had travel and business expense policies, which were approved by the TCEDA board that left the door open for possible fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. Words exactly from the audit. The TCEDA board allowed the TCEDA director to approve his own expenses that exceeded the policy limitations. The TCEDA board approved the original version of the policy that allowed the director to overrule the TCEDA board policies at any time. Debbie Batista explained that. According to the auditors, the TCEDA board approved a policy that did not comply with IRS rules. The TCEDA board had required no documentation to know whether the director was doing his job in a $500,000 a year agency. The audit says TCEDA's tracking of performance metrics, as Debbie also mentioned, fell short of those reported by similar economic development agencies. It's a fact that Tuolumne County has had a flat economy for years. Caltrans forecasts no change in that. So the Board of Supervisors and the TCEDA board, and I want to have us cast our minds back, denied every one of these findings when they came out with the grand jury as far back as the grand jury report, saying it was personal attacks, saying it was just procedural, and recently John Gray refused to even say how many people were being considered as a new EDA director. I don't call that transparency at the most basic level. It's time to acknowledge the elephant in the room. It was the TCEDA board that allowed this waste of community funds with no documentation or indicators of economic improvement through its work. So in order to renew community confidence and to actually see benefit to our county, in future operations of economic development, there will have to be huge changes. The TCEDA board has completely lost the community confidence in its operations. One other question. The information that came off those laptops, was that provided to the auditors?
Everything that they asked for, they received.
Did they know that information was in your office?
The auditors requested a heck of a lot of information. They did, because of the risk, they did a phenomenal amount of documentation and testing. They documented and tested every single receipt that went through TCEDA for fiscal year 17-18. They looked at more receipts than they look at for my whole county. They looked at a large percentage of the checks. They got the check register for the Economic Prosperity Council. They got all the backup for the Economic Prosperity Council. But again, remember, the audit is for 17-18. They did not go back to day one. They looked at every single one of Mr. Cope's time cards. I'm thinking of everything that's in my folder. They looked at contracts. They looked at grants. They looked from a financial standpoint. They looked at a phenomenal amount of documentation for fiscal year 17-18.
Well, just to put that, to frame that a little bit, the concern is that a lot of the work that he did was not documented. And so the information that comes off of his personal laptop and the 3 Microsoft tablets or whatever they're called that he used might be something that would not be found in any paper trail. So that's my question. You're saying, I'm asking, did they even know that this existed?
Well, so let me be clear about this. All of those, Larry was around when the audit was begun, and he provided them whatever information that they had requested. We got essentially the hard drive, so copies of what was on his computers right before he left. So I really, to my knowledge, he gave them whatever that they asked for. We gave them whatever they asked for. And I don't know whether or not they, what the difference is on what's on his computer files versus what you're asking about.
But we don't actually know if he gave
Okay,
him those
so,
files.
Well, whatever they asked for, because they never
If they
had a
knew it
complaint.
existed. Okay, we'll let
I
it go
think-
here.
But I want to make a clarification. You made a statement that we didn't agree with the grand jury findings. And if you would read the grand jury responses to that, we agreed with a lot of it. So I don't know how you can come up here and say that this entity, the EDA, didn't agree with the grand jury. That's not being truthful.
It's being an abundance of truthful. And if you want to have backup, I can get you chapter and verse. So I don't think you want to go there. Thank you.
Please read the formal responses from the EDA board to the grand jury.
The formal responses, but you had a lot of information in the newspaper prior to that time saying it was just procedural and it was personal attacks. We'll leave it there. I can get that.
Please read the grand jury responses. Thank you.
The grand jury responses are available online at the Tuolumne County website, and I actually just reread it today. So it's there. Anybody can look at it.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions. The 80 hours that Mr. Cope gave back was a pretty egregious, theft maybe of county time. Has anybody gone back to other years to see if he did the same thing?
Again, what was only available to the auditors, what was only available to myself, and Sarah will have to speak to what she had available, was Mr. Cope's calendar for calendar year 2017 and calendar year 2018. All of that was given to the auditors and myself, and what the auditors, if you look at page 6, what the auditors were determined for fiscal year 2017, they came up with 16 days and not 8 days. However, the agreement was 8 days. So, or 10 days. Yeah, it was 80 hours. I'm sorry, my brain's gone. Was 10 days. In in 2018, there didn't appear to be any compensating or any CTO, any compensating time off. I think that that's when he understood the difference, and so that wasn't happening. They did not see any additional hours in 2018. But going back from 2010 to 2017, nobody did that.
Do we have access to those records? Is there any thought about doing that? And does he have any liability for that?
I don't know that we have access to his calendar, but certainly Debbie would have time cards. And I do want to point out, if you look back at the grand jury response, there is a whole list and host of activities that Mr. Cope was doing while he was away in Europe, and he did do some work activities. So for you to characterize it as theft is inaccurate. We obviously didn't agree with him putting comp time down on a time card or a calendar, and we wanted to correct that. But again, I would just ask, please go back and look at the response to the grand jury report, because it does, in more detail, provide a response to that issue.
Well, it's my impression that reading the management report is that they looked at that and decided that that wasn't sufficient. But, okay, we'll leave that one. Came up with the person before me. Could you tell me, is that legal for somebody to be considered a county employee for PERS when he's not?
Want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Again, prior to the Pension Reform Act, numerous counties had their JPAs, because remember, a Joint Powers Authority has usually a very few number of employees, but they want to give the employees the benefit of a retirement system. So numerous counties have employees that are the JPA that they reported under the county contract, because it would not, to contract with PERS for 2 or 3 employees just isn't logical or beneficial. However, after the pension reform, plus there's new legislations that new JPAs, not old JPAs, are no longer allowed to be included in, they have to have their own contract, which having a couple employees kind of makes it prohibitive to have their own contract. In the past, that was not unusual. And for example, in the counties, because we're true, open, and transparent here, in the counties, PERS is TCTC, Tuolumne Transit.
CTA also is a child.
Child support used to be, but when the JPA was formed,
That's
they
right.
did
We
their
moved
own
that.
contract because they had the 3 different counties. And the last JPA that we entered, and I'm not going to do the name right, the water one,
The
those
Integrated
employees
Regional Water Management
are
Authority.
not in our PERS, just to be clear.
But this JPA was formed prior to that Reform Act,
Correct,
and it was grandfathered in?
correct.
Thank you.
So you said unusual, but it's totally legal. There's no question about it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you have a jurisdiction, you're going to be in the pool, and you have a couple employees, your jurisdiction won't have, in my opinion, a very long life, because the fixed cost for your PERS in about 4 or 5 years will probably, unless you're very profitable, will probably put you under.
And then just one other quick question. You said at one point that the TCEDA does not exist anymore?
It's not, no, the TCEDA still exists anymore, but we're in the process of closing it down.
Oh, okay. I thought you said it didn't exist anymore. So
The employee side of it doesn't
doesn't
exist anymore.
Okay. I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Bring it back to the board for discussion. Oh,
Just real quickly, I'd like to ask if this board is going to dissolve And what happens now? Are you still going forward to fill the interim position?
Go ahead.
Right, so there's two separate issues. This board, the city and the county both voted to withdraw, so that means we are actively dissolving the TCEDA. The county is the entity that posted an interim economic development position. That there's been no hire in that process, and the board, I think, will be considering what it wants to do in the future. But this entity will be dissolved.
Okay, so when I heard about this meeting today, it was in the article that Alex wrote for the paper. And I went to the county website and I couldn't find anything about this meeting, like when it would happen and where it would be.
Right.
And so I would like to be able to follow what happens.
So when we initially came forward after both the city and the county voted to withdraw, and we started to wind down all of the entity, again, it's a separate legal entity. That website, any cost associated with running the EDA was basically shut down, except for the office space over there. It still sort of exists, but no work is happening in there. So there was no website to post it to. But again, I did at a prior meeting, I know Alex happened to be sitting there, I did at a board meeting, I did note that we were going to be having this meeting, and then again, we posted notice as required by the Brown Act. I understand you would like more notice, but what I will also say is that we, as soon as we got the audits, that they were available, we had a meeting scheduled, and again, if the board is inclined to want to continue this matter to the June meeting, we can certainly do that to allow the public more time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Carmi Ennis. I just needed one point of clarification that I couldn't quite understand, and it's just one question. Did the grand jury get the information from the laptops, yes or no?
Can you answer that, Sarah?
What information are you?
The information that was taken off and put on the hard drives that was brought up by people asking questions earlier.
Which grand jury are you referencing?
The one that did the report.
So,
I'm hearing dancing around. That's what's making me nervous. Is all the information out there?
I think we had the grand jury that did the report was last year's grand jury. I don't know what.
they made several requests. I know that Mr. Cope, our office, Debbie's office, all worked with them to provide them information that they requested. That should be set forth in their report and in the responses by my office, Debbie, and the EDA board. I can't be more specific because I don't know what specific information you're asking about.
Did they get the information off the laptops? That's the question I heard answered before, and as a citizen, but we'll leave it there.
There have been any number of Public Records Act requests, all of which have been fulfilled, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
If it was asked for, it was given.
Right.
if it was pertinent, it's been delivered.
Okay, no other public comment. Bring it back, board discussion. Matt brought up a point that he doesn't want to act on it now. I'm fine with moving it to our June 14th meeting, if that works, or?
I just want to clarify what we're doing, okay? These are audit reports, okay? All we're doing is accepting the reports as
issued by the outside auditors.
That's right. So it's not like we're taking any action on these or anything like that. It doesn't preclude us from, I guess, addressing the contents of them in the future again, but we're not empowered to change these reports, right?
Neither am I.
And,
No.
exactly. So I don't see any value in not accepting the reports. They're out in the public. The people that want to read them can read them. We're not responding to them, are we?
We already did. We're done.
Okay, so I don't know what the value is in not accepting the reports today.
We have them.
They're not going to change.
No.
That's the point, right? I mean,
Right. And anybody who wants copies of them certainly can contact me. I've already sent them out to numerous citizens who have asked for them. I'll be glad to give anybody copies that want. I have 15 hard copies, but I have electronic copies also. Gave it to the newspaper, we gave it to the radio station. Just contact me and I'll be glad to give you copies of the reports.
Any other comment? Jim?
Yeah. I received the audit reports less than 30 hours before the meeting. I've actually received the agenda packet 25 and a half hours before the meeting. I've worked at least one shift and a good portion of another and slept. I have not read the audits, and there's no way I'm going to vote to accept anything that I have not read.
just to clarify.
And I understand where you're going, Carl, but I'm just not.
No, we'll let him
Understand.
finish.
Let me ask the question. What if we vote to not accept them today? What does that mean?
Technically,
Yeah,
Nothing.
nothing.
okay. If we vote to accept them, it really doesn't matter what we do today. They're done. They've been put together. They're done. I don't,
So why don't we we have them, I have them, I accept that I've got them. Do we want to put this on an agenda for further discussion on June 14th?
We can certainly do that.
okay.
And then leave it at that?
Do it.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
And then that way, if somebody wants to talk more about it,
But,
Ms. Batista, will you be available June 14th?
I think so.
Okay.
but again, just for everybody to understand, we don't have any power to change them. These were done by an independent agency. We can agree or disagree with them, but we can't not accept them. That's what we were asked to do, was to have this independent agency look at us, and they did, and they've given us a report. We've answered the report. I don't know that, we'll look at them again on June 14th.
Okay. Does that work for everybody? Okay. Ms. Drivdahl?
Okay. C, presentation on status of the dissolution process.
Okay.
So in terms of the electronic record distribution, our office is reviewing the electronic records of the EDA, and we'll be providing all the non-confidential records, a copy to the city, which is what they requested, and what your board directed at the last meeting. So we hope to have that done by June 30th.
Okay.
And then, as you heard, a great deal of discussion about PERS. In terms of outstanding debts and liabilities, the JPA formation document requires that all of the agency's debts and advances are to be paid, and then to divide all of the property prior to dissolution. So that process is underway. Also, the government code requires the agency and the member agencies to address and resolve the PERS unfunded liability prior to dissolving the agency. So there are 3 former TCEDA employees. They participated in the PERS system, and therefore, the EDA has an unfunded liability. The city, the county, the auditor, controller at my office have met about this issue. We have another meeting scheduled for next week to work towards resolving how to address and pay for the unfunded liability. The agency will not be allowed to dissolve until that is addressed. That is in the government code. It is set forth in your memo. So we would like to, again, move as quickly as possible, but we cannot do so without this one item being resolved. And that's kind of it for our the process.
And until the agency is dissolved, both entities, both partnering agencies, entities, legal entities, are responsible for funding this agency.
Right, pursuant to the formation document, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any questions? No action. D,
Public comment.
public comment on presentation status of dissolution process. Any public comment? Seeing none. D,
Cancellation of May 9th TCEDA meeting and scheduling next TCEDA meeting for June 14th, 2019 at 4 PM.
does that work for most everybody? That's a Friday.
Yeah, this is something that we've contacted you each individually, so it should work for your schedule.
Okay,
It's already on my schedule.
Perfect.
so that's a lot of notice.
Yes, it is.
Okay. You got that, Alex? June 14th?
Flag Day.
John, did you want to ask for any public comment on that?
Public comment.
Hi, David Goldenberg again. Yeah, that's great. I just kind of wonder, setting the meeting for 4 PM on a Friday,
That
Might
was
not
the
allow
only
enough
date
time.
that worked for their schedules and for the board chambers. So we looked at many options, and that was the one date and time that worked.
okay, and, just looking at what occurs here
Look,
today, there might be,
I don't like meeting at 4 o'clock on Friday.
granted.
That'd be, it's my last choice, but it ended up being where we ended up with everybody that's involved in it to try to get everybody in the room was that. And it's not my preference either, believe me. I would like to not be here at
Correct.
4
It's
o'clock.
difficult to match schedules, I understand. Okay, thank you.
Just by pushing the meeting out to June, is the fiscal year ends June 31st? Are we trying to close the TCA by then?
Well, it would be ideal, but I don't know if we can resolve some of these outstanding issues that have to be resolved prior to dissolution.
Okay.
We're trying to do it as fast as we can. That's
So I
the,
was just wondering why you canceled the May meeting, just
Because of schedule conflicts.
schedule, yeah, okay.
okay? Any more public comment? Board reports? Carl?
Just like to apologize to the public and the board for delaying getting here. I did have another urgent meeting, last minute, special meeting of another JPA involving a personnel hiring that I needed to be at, and so I apologize for the conflict.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Jim?
Yeah, and it kind of actually kind of relates to D. Will that be considered a regular meeting or a scheduled meeting? And
That
and
should be a special meeting.
That's why I meant special meeting. I have had some, 25 and a half hours to get the whole thing and then try to get it done and read is kind of, seems to me a little unreasonable to be a decision maker sitting here on the board. I would like for us to be able to get at least a partial agenda out beforehand if we're not going to get the whole thing out. I know the board supervisors have had amended agendas when items come up late and still can be scheduled. It's too short a time, to try to get through everything, so.
We
can
understand we can work on doing something earlier. I will note, and again for the public, because I want to be really clear here, nobody got the audits until Monday. So, again, and as soon as the audits were released, there was a meeting so that they could be presented to your board and addressed. I understand you're saying you didn't have enough time to review them.
Well,
What I want to make it clear, because I think there's been a lot of public kind of assumptions that there's been a negative intent here. The intent was to present as soon as we have them available, which is what the public had told us that they wanted. So I want to be clear, we did that to make it happen. But again, I understand you're not ready to approve it until you have more time.
Well, I understand that, but there's also there were other items that could have been sent out sooner, that we could have reviewed the minutes, we could have gone over the distribution plan if that was available earlier. The other thing, is there a way to put the agenda on the county's agenda center part of the web, so people can actually get, that people have access to it right away, or when it's posted?
I don't know if that's a possibility
I mean-
for a non-county entity. I guess we can look and ask the county's IT department if they could assist with that. I don't know if
And I
the
would-
city has an easier,
We may actually have an easier way,
Okay.
so I'd have to find out about that, but it's nice to have it posted somewhere.
Okay,
That's all I got.
good. Okay, we're going to adjourn TCED.
Jim?
Yeah, yeah, I had something really quick. Just make a comment. I don't think there was any, something that was just said a second ago. I don't think there was any ill will or anything from legal counsel. It's the perception from the public, and I can't blame them. Hey, they got this thing, and then they pushed it through real fast. And I don't think there was anything from legal counsel. If it did, my wording would have been differently. But I mean, I know both of you really well, and in my opinion, you two are not only very legal, but you're very morally stand-up people. So, you know, I don't think that. My biggest thing is making sure that we're transparent. And this is not fun for anyone. This is not enjoyable, but it's something that needs to be done, and it needs to be done correctly. So, you know, when I'm looking at it from just one of our constituents' point of view, that's why I would look at it that way and say, hey, let's take some time to look at this. But I wouldn't think from anywhere that our legal department would even think that way.
appreciate that, thank you.
Okay, now we just adjourned TCEDA, and we're going to be talking Economic Prosperity Council.
All right.
Carlin?
Continuing with the Economic Prosperity Council agenda, number 5, approval of the minutes of the March 14th, 2019 EPCTC Board Special Meeting.
Looking for a motion to approve minutes.
You want public comment?
I will public comment on the minutes. Public comment on the minutes, seeing none.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Rutherford, second by Garaventi. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 6.
Okay. Consideration of adopting a resolution to elect to voluntarily wind up and dissolve the EPCTC pursuant to Corporations Code Section 6610B3 and authorize the EPCTC officers, county council, and the county auditor controller to complete any necessary paperwork and any other wind-up activities. So I'll be presenting this item in order to dissolve a public benefit nonprofit corporation in California. There's a process you have to go through. First, your board needs to adopt a resolution that you are looking to dissolve the entity. Then we will follow up with submitting a packet to the Attorney General's office that will review the dissolution packet. Once they approve that packet, then we will actually submit it to the Secretary of State's office, and once that is submitted, the nonprofit will be dissolved. So that is the process. Right now, the resolution that is before you identifies the EPC's cash and other assets that will be used to pay for any remaining liabilities and then distributed upon dissolution. The spreadsheet was distributed at the beginning of the meeting. The cash in bank total assets is $19,642.04. We are proposing in the resolution to set aside a reserve amount of $1,000 to cover any expenses, such as the final tax return preparation and any filing fees. The resolution designates the TCEDA as the recipient of all remaining EPCTC assets, and finally authorizes the EPC's officers, county council, and the county auditor controller to file any paperwork and take any additional actions necessary to dissolve the EPC.
Any questions from the board? Any public comment?
Earlier on, you went into closed session for anticipated litigation. Can you then close the board when you have anticipated litigation?
So we're not going to address the anticipated litigation, but we are recommending the board dissolve, so we don't believe there's any issue outstanding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Bring it back to the board.
Move on staff recommendation.
I'll second it.
Motion by Rutherford, seconded by Hawkins. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the favorite part? Go ahead.
Oh, adjourn.
Thank you. And I really want to thank you all up there for the work. I know it's added and a lot to your days, and I certainly appreciate it. So, public, thank you for coming.